Okay, welcome back then. Early November 1863. It's been about 6 months now since the end of the Great Balkan War with Austria, and we're seeing really good signs of recovery now for the most part in the Balkan Peninsula. No kind of signs of looting or damage to infrastructure or anything like this, and there doesn't really seem to be any kind of signs of long-term damage to the economy. Sometimes that can happen where you can't export, for example, a particular resource, and it kind of breaks a bit of a kind of an export chain. You know, maybe a foreign sort of buyer might end up sort of going elsewhere and end up stockpiling kind of resource, which can be frustrating. But that doesn't seem to be the case. The economy is looking fairly healthy, looking at really kind of good, robust domestic market sales and signs of consistent economic growth. We have continued to expand our industrial base. Diversifying in terms of regions now. We always want to try and keep them out of reach of sort of Russia, Austria. We tend to utilize the Balkan Peninsula as a source of coal and as a bit of a breadbasket of the economy, focusing, of course, industrialization on kind of central and western Anatolia. But we are now beginning our first kind of manufacturing in the Levant and Damascus. We've got a manufactured goods shop in construction. We are going to be looking to construct probably a textile factory in Baghdad at some point, although textiles factory is extremely expensive for us at the moment, partly because we've got a slightly distorted economy and it makes things quite expensive when that happens. We don't have high inflation or anything like that, but we've got an additional manufactured goods shop going in Smyrna, the sort of second industrial city of the empire. And in terms of rail lines, we're still continuing to press a line up to Sarajevo. That's going to be complete in about 7-8 months, something like that. And we've got the Mesopotamian line in construction. Completion of that line in its entirety, 120 days really. Of course, that'll be fairly gradual in terms of, you know, Mosul will be connected, for example, in 60 days and such. So things are looking good economically. We are going to be a little bit cautious about aggressive industrial expansion because we don't want to create distortions in our economy. By which, I mean, for example, we import a fairly significant amount of coal at the moment. Actually not as much as I thought, about 16 units per ton. But what we want to do really, before we massively expand our industrial base, we are going to, for example, we want to look at building another steel smelting plant and additional manufactories. But at a certain, I mean, we're already outstripping our own domestic supply of coal, and we are, we're tapping into, all of the coal resources that we have. So we want time for technology to catch up a little bit, so that we don't become hugely dependent on certain kinds of raw materials. We are building a minerals mine in Bursa. I think this is to do with our kind of industrial, sort of military industrial complex. I think minerals are required. I may be wrong. We could really check this, can't we? For the production of ammunition, for example. Let's have a look at what goes into this. So it's mechanical parts, steel, coal, not that. Nitrates and chemicals. Something that we've built is requiring a lot of minerals. I'm trying to think what manufacturing it would be. What kind of manufacturing? Let's have a look. Manufactured minerals. Okay, so it's luxury goods shops then. Minerals required for that. And we have been a minerals exporter, but we're actually now running a loss in terms of minerals. We've got a bit of a stockpile. We're no longer exporting, and we're looking to we've actually got fairly good domestic access to minerals, so there's no real kind of concerns there. In fact, just double check that. So in terms of mineral quarries, yeah, we've got ample domestic access around the empire, so it's never going to be a case that we're going to need to import. And we're only just slightly kind of running at a loss in terms of minerals. So we're always going to try and make sure that we kind of that our supply chains, that we keep as much as we can inside the kind of boundaries of the empire, that we don't become dependent on imports and this kind of thing. Now, we are intentionally, as I say, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, intentionally slowing the growth of our economy a little bit, in order that we don't have, again, create huge distortions. We've built a fairly large, for example, a large part of our economy is based on textiles. That makes textiles more expensive. Once you start getting a lot of a certain kind of manufacturing relative to other kinds of manufactories, or as a proportion of your entire industrial base, those things become almost prohibitively expensive. So yeah, we're slowing that down. And one of the ways we're doing that also is to continuously stockpile gold. Now, I've mentioned the gold mechanism a couple of times. The function of this is really to convert private wealth into state resources. Now, we've got a good stockpile of 10. We're not really selling much of the stuff in the domestic market. We're making sure that it's not really available, because otherwise it returns as kind of private capital. But instead is gradually sort of converted into state revenue, into kind of bullion for the state reserve. If we do that too much, that will generate inflation. So we'll keep an eye on inflation. We don't mind 1 or 2%, sort of points, but it's really good. It means that the wealth, the industrial base of our economy, we can now translate a lot of that strength into kind of resources that the state can use, and do it in such a way that doesn't upset anyone, it doesn't result in tax increases or anything like that. And it's on the back of that, really, and obviously, the regular taxation that we collect based on transactions and a larger economy will return more tax revenue, and also reparations from Austria, that we have been ploughed a significant amount of resources, and we are continuing to do so, and we'll do so for another year and a half. This project will kind of be completely a year and a half, and it's really the militarization of the Balkan Peninsula. So I mentioned in the last video, we're looking at construction, enlarging or modernizing fortresses at Constanta, Plevna, Sofia, Salonika, and Sarajevo, with a rail line going up to Sarajevo. Now, this construction is a long-term thing. It doesn't happen overnight. It does require a lot of time, a lot of resources to do this. But, of course, in addition to that, we've been building back-to-back specialized fortress garrison forces. So, for example, if we can look at Salonika now, we can see that we have a professional full-time fortress garrison of about 36,000 men. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we've got in-place batteries, and that is going to be expanded upon also. That's just a bit of a beginning, really. We'll probably stick a few more divisions in there. The idea is to have about 50 to 75,000 fortress troops in all of these fortresses, and they're going to be modern fortresses. We've done the same, for example, in Sofia. We've got 50,000 men in Sofia. 38,000, shade under 40,000 in Plevna and in Constanta. Kind of the same. And the other thing, of course, is gun emplacements. We won't really be doubling up or tripling up on a gun emplacement, so that we've got a lot of ranged advantages over the enemy. It means that in the event, of course, this is, we've fought 3 wars really in the last decade, and they've all been in the Balkan Peninsula against opponents that are looking to seize territory in the Balkan Peninsula. We have to draw conclusions from that, and to ensure that in the future, if the war is going to be fought on our territory, which it likely is, because we don't really have much in the way of options there, that it's extremely grinding and slow for the Austrians. It means it buys us a lot of time to kind of vector our forces in and to kind of engage in stinging counterattacks. The idea is to have these fortresses as being so modern, so powerful, so well kind of stocked with munitions and supplies and this kind of thing, that in the event of a siege, if they're assaulted, it would result in catastrophic casualties for the Austrians. They would need to really besiege the fortress for many, many, many months. The idea, of course, and I mentioned this in the last video, is that we can actually use these as a kind of holding force, a link of fortresses. We can still have a mobile field command to kind of support them, but the idea is to kind of concentrate our forces in such a way that we can, in the event of war with Austria, maybe make a move from northern Bosnia to Vienna, the shortest kind of marching distance to Vienna, and that could be done, I think, probably within a fortnight to a month. The other developments are, in the Hejaz, we are now really genuinely making headway. We've introduced 2 additional divisions, so that's about sort of, altogether, a shade under 30,000 men. So 30,000 men, a bit of a surge has been introduced. We've got Bayezid Pasha now. We've concentrated a lot of our kind of field commander under Bayezid Pasha. He's a pretty good 2-star general, and we're looking really to kind of not be too crazy, steamroller them. We've now secured a position in Hadramut, which we hadn't really had for some years. And we're looking to just hold this position, build a colonial fort, develop the region, suppress revolts and this kind of thing. We are seeing some kind of results now for these kind of military pacification. You can see that if you read the readout, use military units to quell any revolt attempt in the region will reduce revolt risk, and use military units to patrol and watch over the natives will reduce revolt risk. So the kind of variations on a theme. Use military force to burn native villages in a show of brute force will greatly reduce revolt risk, but sudden uprising is possible. So it's a little bit of kind of rolling the dice, but the idea is that over time this does reduce the revolt risk. Now, the revolt risk when unoccupied in Sana was nearly 4% about 3 years ago, so that has greatly reduced. Taiz is only 0.63. This is beginning to pay dividends. We're reducing the ability of the kind of Yemenis to reinforce through large-scale colonial revolt. Now, one thing that we are doing is beginning to construct smaller forces in addition to these 2 divisions that are really securing the port at Aden, which we've developed, we've rebuilt up, of course. We're reconstructing a kind of pre-industrial conventional fortress, and we've got a mission. And before we spend too much money exploiting the area economically, that will definitely come. We want to make sure that we've got security in place. Missions are important for also gradually suppressing revolt risk. In addition to these 2 divisions, what we're also doing is constructing just very, very small, irregular forces, kind of like modern versions of Bashi Bazooks. We've got one that's completed now. It's a militia brigade. very, very sort of small force, 6,000 men, and we're now going to send this force to Aden with the riverine movement. We're going to get this force into Sanaa, and that will constitute a kind of a garrison. This force will stay in Sanaa. We can use this to conduct these operations: pacification, military expedition prosecutions, military expedition retaliation. All these kinds of things can be played on the basis of having a permanent force in Sanaa, and over time that will consolidate block by block this area, and ultimately, you know, there's an increasingly thin wedge of territory in the east controlled by the Yemenis. They still technically control Hodeidah, but they don't have anything there to enforce that, so this area can be reoccupied fairly readily. So after many, many years, Aden, it feels like there's light at the end of the tunnel. I have said that before, but I think now increasingly, you know, we're developing our kind of apparatus of control in this region. And the irony is that all of this means that we've got a really, really high, like atypically high amount of colonial penetration in Aden, which means that once we've kind of forced to the east, once we've actually got them to the east and we develop Gadair a little bit, we could push quite quickly for colonial status here, which is quite surprising. But it's because of our kind of, you know, unending kind of attempt to suppress the locals. It's part of the result of that is this increased colonial penetration. So we actually have more average colonial penetration, for example, in Aden than we do in Hejaz, or even the Gulf states. And that's because of you know, our unending presence, the amount of resources we've poured into the region. So Aden is going well, and I can say that with some confidence, probably for the first time since the beginning of the campaign in 1850, I do genuinely think, you know, even in the event of a massive revolt now, I mean, we've got really substantial forces. We've got, you know, sort of 20, got like 50,000 men in Aden now. It's a real surge. It's the most amount of boots on the ground we've had so far. We can continue to trickle forces in, gradually introduce new forces, and that is having some good results. Now, in terms of sort of foreign policy, I'll probably say this is going to be a little bit of a shorter video than most would be, partly because it's, you know, it's really just a kind of business report, it's just keeping updated with the campaign, and obviously during sort of peacetime, it's really just a process of kind of economic administration and this sort of thing. But there are some interesting developments in terms of foreign policy. So Prussia has gone to war with Denmark. I don't know if this is scripted. It didn't really seem to be, but it might be at least a byproduct of the scripting, which is to say the Schleswig-Holstein crisis, which maybe provides one or the other with a casus belli against the other. I think it was actually Denmark that declared war on Prussia, which is surprising. And Prussia now, of course, controls everything save for Copenhagen. So I think they're making fairly sort of short work of the Danes. Now, where things are becoming really interesting, of course, is this situation in Poland. Now, you'll notice that the map looks rather strange, a bit distorted. This looks much more like maybe an 18th century map, except, of course, there's no Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But this is not the kind of tidy sort of borderline that we've become used to in the 19th century, with Congress Poland bulging in, with Warsaw providing the centerpiece to Russian-controlled Poland. No, that is not the case. A large-scale Polish revolt, which may have been what was behind Austria, offering us a peace deal, at least in part, clearly spiraled out of control. The Russians occupied elsewhere, have had to move forces in. Of course, they do have a rail line, so they can project forces, but they were slow on the mark. It's resulted, as I mentioned in the last video, in Prussia controlling both Warsaw and Lodz, or Lodz, I'm not sure how the city's actually pronounced. Both of these cities are a part of Congress Poland. So Russia will have a casus belli against Prussia on that basis. I think Warsaw may even be considered a kind of key strategic city for the Russians. So they will absolutely not accept Prussia there long term. That might automatically change. I'm not sure if Prussian troops withdraw from Warsaw, whether it gradually goes over to Russia. But the other area of interest, of course, is Tarnow. Now, Tarnow, it was a part of the Austrian part of kind of Poland, if you like. This is ethnically Polish, this region, and Russia was able to re-secure control over that region as something of a concession. That has caused a real upset, and just to this turn, Austria has declared war on Russia. So yeah, our two kind of opponents, our two foes, are now at war with each other. This could be really interesting. We should keep in mind that Russia's army is a lot larger than it was in the Crimean War, but it is spread. It's the largest army on earth, hand over fist. We haven't got any good intel at the moment on what Austria's situation is, or Prussia's. But I can say that by the end of the war, with Austria, they're about on parity with France and Prussia. France, Prussia, and Austria had about sort of similar kind of strength. We destroyed probably anything from a quarter to a third, and I mean destroyed completely, of the Austrian army in that war. It was still massive, it was still larger than our army, and it was still frightening to look at when it achieved force concentration at certain times, but we destroyed a large part of the Austrian army. What has compelled Austria to do this? I mean, I suppose, again, Austria is chasing the fact that in terms of prestige, it is lagging. It's been supplanted by us. It probably viewed us as a bit of a soft target in the Southern Balkans. It's looked to press its claim on Bosnia. This has not come off. It's done all it can in terms of the minor states. I mean, the minor states that border Austria in southern Germany are allies of Austria for the time being. And it's done pretty much all it can in the Italian peninsula as a response to the Piedmont Sardinia. It can't really impose itself anywhere else. And of course, the idea of Russia seizing a part of Austrian Poland has caused great offence. The Austrians will not stand for this, and they've responded fairly quickly. Probably looking to bolster sagging national morale again. Their prestige has kind of sunk. Their stock is declining as a great power. This could be a really interesting war. I mean, it's going to, if the least desirable outcome is a quick war either way, really. We don't want Russia to completely destroy Austria really quickly. We don't want Austria. I mean, what if Austria does really well? That would not be desirable either. If Austria did really well against Russia, that would not be in our interest. What would be in our interest is a fairly protracted attritional war, which is extremely costly for both sides. I think probably whatever the weather, we can now say that given our two opponents are Russia and Austria, we could be looking at a period of peace, at least whilst these two powers are at each other's throats. Furthermore, this of course will provide us with opportunities to do exactly what we want to do, which is to completely dismember the Austrian Empire. We cannot miscalculate here, though. We have to be very, very careful. We have to judge this really, really carefully, because this, the French and the British, we've got fairly good relations with them. We've got a kind of commerce agreement with both of these powers. We don't want to alienate the only European powers that have some measure of sympathy for us. Now, we have a peace deal with Austria. It's a kind of ceasefire that I think has to be. Let's have a look. Peace, so 8 turns left. Peace treaty exists between you and target nation. You can't declare war against them until the treaty expires. You can't cancel the treaty if if this entry is a war involving your nation. Select the opposing nation, then ask for peace. We can't do anything for at least 8 turns, which is however many. I mean, by the end of the year, it's going to be early next year, and then the opportunity may well present itself. If Austria is still fighting against Russia, then much of its forces based in the Carpathians. This could provide us with really a very simple thunder run to Vienna. If it comes off, it's very, very easy. We know this in the time that we live in. Like to sort of look at military operations and think it's inevitable. It's easy. There is absolutely no doubt that can happen. We have to be a little bit careful. We have to, know that it is going to come off. I think Austrians still have fairly large forces in Bucharest. I think there's a fairly good chance these forces begin moving north. So we'll be looking at occupying Bucharest also, seizing the fortress there, and seizing really the heartland of the Austrian Empire, and anchoring ourselves, straddling this position, central Hungary, Vienna, in the event of a war early next year. And that'll be the third war with Austria, and maybe third time lucky. The basis for that war is we're not looking to press any claims, but will be to dismember the empire, force, for example, Hungary, maybe Croatia, maybe a few territories to secede, and cripple Austria as a major power. And we would look to support these breakaway powers also. We'd look to provide them with guarantees, and we would look at their independence as the basis for our own security. So, we're obviously going to follow events in the Carpathians with real kind of eagerness. The other thing, of course, is this is happening in 1863. Bismarck is in power in Prussia. He is looking to unite Germany. The first port of call, really, the first hurdle in terms of doing that is supplanting Austria as the dominant German state. Now, the Protestant north of Germany is already basically pro-Prussian, but it's the Catholic southern states, especially Bavaria, the most significant, really, of the kind of I think it's a kingdom. I think the Bavarian, it's not a principality, I think he's actually a king. But anyway, that's the most significant sort of independent German sort of state, really. It's Catholic, it's pro-Austria, and Austria, in order to lose its position as the sort of preeminent southern German state, Prussia has to make a move. If that happens whilst Austria is at war with Russia, I mean, it's too tempting. It's sort of, that would be a mouth-watering opportunity. And whilst we have to be careful and kind of judge this right and make our move in the right kind of way and make sure that we've sort of, counted all our kind of, count all our eggs before they hatch kind of thing. We don't want to kind of let these windows close, these opportunities pass, because this war with Russia might just be a flash in the pan, might be very, very brief. Russia might happily secede this territory, while Austria might occupy it, and upon the occupation of that territory doesn't want to press any more claims. So this could be much more like kind of Japan and Russia in 1938, clashes in the border type thing. This might not be a big war, so we shouldn't get too excited, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the most significant development in the last 6 months that's actually happened in the last term. So we'll follow that and see what happens with that. I don't think, for the most part, there's anything else to report. I'm just scouring around the map, keeping an eye on things. Now, what we are going to do, once Yemen is for the most part secure, is we're going to detach one of these infantry divisions and we're going to land in Massawa, and we're going to pretty much do in Massawa what we did in Aden. Once this area is secure, it becomes a formal colony, and it's no longer a kind of a security problem, we of course have a large colonial police force that's looking for a job to do, and we are going to be fixing our eyes on the Horn of Africa. Now, we're already establishing ourselves in Harar, or Harare, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, which is the sort of the other Ethiopian kingdom to the southeast. We've got a mission going in there, and a colonial trade post also, and we'll probably look to militarily occupy most of Abyssinia, really, as the basis. We'll see what happens. I mean, the Italians have fairly good colonial penetration, about 44%, and they're not far off. I'm just looking, actually, when they're not too far off. 5% here. Yeah, they're probably not far off protectorate status. If that is the case, then we could even consider a colonial war against Piemonte, to tell you the truth. Although, Abyssinia, this is the Empire of Abyssinia, but Abyssinia as a colonial entity actually is this entire region. So it actually is both of these places. Although Piemonte has reasonable colonial penetration, these other locations also. We'll see what happens. I mean, there may be a colonial revolt here. These kind of this Italian infrastructure, if you like, might very well be destroyed, and we hope that is the case, and it can be replaced by us. But in any case, we've got to try to establish ourselves in Eritrea for the first time in a century or so. And also in Somaliland, we're going to be looking to establish ourselves. So that's going to be a kind of a side project. And yeah, continue to drive up a colonial penetration. I think the main thing now is going to be looking at, we've got a good amount of state revenue that we've collected. In the next couple of months, we're going to be conducting a major sort of driving operation, looking to develop our apparatus of control in the Hejaz. And we're not too far off the colonial penetration in the Hejaz to move to former colonial status. And with Hejaz in the bag, Aden would follow fairly quickly. These two regions, really, if you like, the kind of southwestern part of the Arabian Peninsula, this can become a formal colony, I would posit, within a year to 2 years. That's absolutely achievable. And so we are going to push for that. And that will then free up resources to really consolidate Kuwait and the Persian Gulf. This is a bit more difficult because the British have put pressure on our presence in this region. Which, they're already protectorates. The British and everyone else has recognised that this is within our sphere of influence, but of course the British don't care too much about that. They're still happy to kind of try and push to atrophy our position here, which has happened, sadly. That's it. Again, I'm not sure how long the video is. Probably a shorter video than most. But the videos during wartime are substantially longer because there's a lot more to cover. We're looking at manoeuvres and plans, military plans and stuff like this, whereas this is much more of a kind of business update. So I'll leave the video there. It's early November, and probably pick up now in January time, I would say, 1864. So thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.